A black young boy screamed to the successful judge, "Don't enter the courtroom," moments later. "This might be the best story you'll hear today. Enjoy it." The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble steps of the Chicago Federal Courthouse as Judge Dorothy Mae Washington adjusted her black robe one final time. At 52, she carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who had fought for every inch of respect in a world that questioned her right to exist in these hallowed halls. Her dark skin gleamed against the crisp white collar of her judicial robes, and her silver hair was pulled back in a perfect chignon that spoke of discipline and authority. Today marked the culmination of the most important case of her career, the corruption trial that would either restore faith in the justice system or destroy what little remained of it. As her driver pulled up to the courthouse steps, Dorothy noticed the usual crowd of reporters and protesters, but something felt different. The air thrummed with an electric tension she couldn't quite place. She had spent 3 sleepless nights reviewing evidence, knowing that powerful men were watching her every move, waiting for her to falter. The construction magnate she was about to sentence had connections that reached into the highest levels of government, and she had already received subtle threats through intermediaries. But Dorothy had never backed down from a fight, and she wouldn't start now. The security detail flanked her as she stepped from the vehicle, their eyes scanning the crowd with practiced vigilance. Dorothy's heels clicked against the stone steps. As she made her way toward the entrance, her mind focused on the day ahead. She had built her reputation on fairness and unwavering commitment to the law, even when it meant standing alone against the tide of corruption that seemed to flow through every level of the system. Today she would either be remembered as the judge who stood up to power or as another casualty in a war she was only beginning to understand. A small commotion near the courthouse steps caught her attention. A maintenance worker's cart had overturned, spilling cleaning supplies across the walkway. The young black woman scrambling to collect the scattered items looked familiar, though Dorothy couldn't place where she might have seen her before. There was something about the woman's quick, nervous movements that made Dorothy pause, but her security team was already ushering her forward, eager to get her safely inside the building, where they could better control the environment. The morning briefing had been routine: case files, security protocols, and the usual reminders about maintaining proper decorum in what promised to be a media circus. But as Dorothy settled into her chambers to review her notes one final time, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking into something far more dangerous than a simple corruption trial. The evidence against the construction magnate was overwhelming, but the silence from his usual defenders in the media and political circles was deafening. In her experience, that kind of quiet usually meant something explosive was about to happen. Dorothy had learned long ago that being a black woman in the judiciary meant walking a tightrope every single day. Too lenient, and she was accused of reverse racism. Too harsh, and she was labeled an angry black woman who couldn't be trusted with real authority. She had navigated these waters for over 2 decades, building a reputation for fairness that even her harshest critics couldn't dispute. But today felt different. Today felt like everything she had worked for was hanging in the balance, and she wasn't entirely sure why. The phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was her clerk informing her that the courtroom was ready and all parties were present. Dorothy took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and prepared to enter what might be the most important day of her judicial career. She had no way of knowing that a young janitor named Ruby Johnson had been listening at keyholes and cleaning around conversations for weeks, gathering pieces of a puzzle that would soon explode into view. As Dorothy made her way toward the courtroom, Ruby was already inside, emptying wastebaskets and trying to blend into the background as she always did. At 28, Ruby had perfected the art of invisibility, moving through the courthouse like a ghost seen but never truly noticed by the powerful men and women who made decisions that affected millions of lives. She had been cleaning these halls for 5 years, working double shifts to support her younger brother's education and their grandmother's medical bills. Ruby's hands trembled slightly as she wiped down the defendant's table, remembering the conversation she had overheard. In the judge's chambers 3 nights earlier, men in expensive suits had spoken in hushed tones about solving the Dorothy problem and ensuring that certain evidence never sees the light of day. She had been cleaning the adjacent bathroom when she heard them discussing something about wine and a celebration that would happen after the verdict. The way they laughed had made her stomach turn. For 3 days, Ruby had wrestled with what she knew. As a black woman working in a building filled with powerful white men, she understood her place in the hierarchy. She was invisible, expendable, and if she spoke up without proof, she would simply disappear. Fired for cause, blacklisted from other jobs, and left with nothing but the knowledge that she had tried to do the right thing. But she also knew that Judge Washington was different from the others. Dorothy had always treated her with basic human dignity, acknowledging her presence with a nod or a quiet, "Good morning," when their paths crossed. The courtroom filled with the usual players, attorneys in $1,000 suits, reporters with their notebooks ready, and spectators who came to witness what everyone knew would be a landmark decision. Ruby positioned herself near the back, supposedly cleaning windows, but actually watching and listening. She had learned to read the room from years of being present, but ignored, and today the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Something was going to happen, and she was probably the only person in the building who knew what it was. As Judge Washington entered the courtroom, Ruby felt her heart racing. The conversation she had overheard replayed in her mind. The mention of wine, the celebration, the cold laughter of men who thought they were untouchable. She had seen the bottle of expensive wine delivered to the judge's chambers that morning, accompanied by a card that she hadn't been able to read, but that bore the seal of the State Bar Association. Everything was falling into place exactly as she had heard it planned, and she was running out of time to act. But who would believe a janitor over the word of judges and attorneys and politicians? And what proof did she have beyond overheard conversations and her own intuition that something terrible was about to happen? The trial proceeded with its usual pomp and formality, but Ruby noticed things others missed. The defendant's attorney seemed unusually relaxed for someone whose client was facing serious prison time. The prosecutor appeared confident, but there was something performative about his presentation, as if he were going through the motions rather than fighting for justice. And Judge Washington, despite her composed exterior, seemed increasingly troubled as the day wore on. Ruby had watched the judge long enough to recognize the subtle signs of stress, the way she pressed her lips together when thinking, the slight tension in her shoulders when making difficult decisions. When the court recessed for lunch, Ruby made her decision. She couldn't prove what she had heard, but she could prevent what she knew was coming. As the courtroom emptied, she slipped into the judge's chambers, her heart pounding so hard she was sure someone would hear it. The bottle of wine sat prominently on Dorothy's desk, still unopened, but clearly intended as a post-verdict celebration. Ruby had heard enough conversations in this building to know that gifts to judges were carefully monitored and usually declined, but this one had somehow made it through all the usual protocols. The afternoon session resumed with closing arguments, and Ruby positioned herself where she could see both the courtroom and the judge's chambers. Her cleaning cart gave her a legitimate reason to be anywhere in the building, and she had perfected the art of purposeful movement that kept security from questioning her presence. As the arguments concluded and Judge Washington prepared to deliver her verdict, Ruby saw several men in expensive suits gathering near the chambers, their faces expectant and confident. The pieces of the puzzle suddenly clicked into place with terrifying clarity. Judge Washington's voice rang out clear and strong as she delivered a guilty verdict on all counts, sentencing the construction magnate to 15 years in federal prison and ordering the forfeiture of millions in ill-gotten gains. The courtroom erupted in chaos. Reporters scrambling for phones, attorneys shouting objections, and the defendant's supporters expressing outrage and disbelief. But Ruby's attention was focused on the men near the chambers, who exchanged glances and nods before disappearing into the crowd. The celebration they had planned was about to begin, and Judge Washington was walking directly into their trap. As the courtroom cleared, and Dorothy retreated to her chambers to decompress from the emotional toll of the day, Ruby knew she had reached the moment of truth. She could remain invisible, safe in her anonymity, and hope that she was wrong about what she had overheard. Or she could risk everything, her job, her safety, her family's security, to save a woman who had shown her nothing but basic human decency. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. Ruby had been invisible for too long, and some things were more important than safety. Dorothy sat alone in her chambers, exhausted but satisfied with the day's work. The verdict had been the right one, even if it meant she would face criticism from powerful interests who had expected a different outcome. She reached for the bottle of wine on her desk, thinking that a small celebration might be in order after all. The card indicated it was from colleagues congratulating her on her years of service, and after the stress of the trial, a glass of good wine seemed like exactly what she needed. The bottle was halfway to her lips when Ruby burst through the door, without knocking, her face flushed with panic and determination. "Judge Washington, don't drink that," she gasped, still clutching her cleaning supplies. "Please don't drink it. They're trying to poison you." Dorothy set the bottle down immediately, her training kicking in as she assessed the situation. Ruby Johnson, the quiet janitor she had seen around the building for years, was standing in her chambers, making an extraordinary accusation that could either save her life or destroy both of their careers. "Ruby, isn't it?" Dorothy said calmly, her mind racing through possibilities. "What exactly did you hear?" Ruby's story came tumbling out. The overheard conversations, the planned celebration, the men who spoke about solving problems and eliminating obstacles. As she talked, Dorothy recognized the ring of truth in her words, the kind of details that couldn't be fabricated, but that would be impossible to prove in court. She reached for her phone and called the FBI field office, requesting an immediate chemical analysis of the wine and protection for both herself and Ruby. The next few hours transformed both women's lives forever. The wine tested positive for a toxin that would have caused what appeared to be a natural heart attack within hours of consumption. The FBI investigation that followed uncovered a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of the state judiciary, involving judges who had been systematically eliminating obstacles to a massive construction fraud scheme. Ruby's willingness to speak up had not only saved Dorothy's life but had exposed corruption that had been hidden for decades. As news of the conspiracy broke, Ruby found herself thrust into a spotlight she had never wanted or sought. Reporters wanted interviews, law enforcement needed testimony, and suddenly the invisible woman who had cleaned floors and emptied trash was being hailed as a hero. Dorothy, meanwhile, faced the difficult reality that colleagues she had trusted and respected had been willing to murder her to protect their own interests. The betrayal was almost as poisonous as the wine had been. Have you ever witnessed or experienced a situation where speaking up felt impossible, but staying silent felt worse? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The weeks that followed tested both women in ways they had never imagined. Ruby struggled with the attention and the knowledge that she had enemies powerful enough to reach her anywhere. Dorothy grappled with the destruction of her faith in the system she had served faithfully for decades, but together they found strength in their shared commitment to truth and justice, forming an unlikely partnership that transcended the social boundaries that had kept them apart. Dorothy used her position and connections to ensure Ruby's safety while the investigation proceeded, but she also did something more important. She listened to Ruby's insights about the courthouse's hidden dynamics, the conversations that happened when powerful people thought no one was watching. Ruby's years of invisibility had given her a unique perspective on how the system really worked, knowledge that proved invaluable as investigators pieced together the full scope of the conspiracy. The trials that followed made national headlines, with Ruby's testimony proving crucial in securing convictions against 17 judges, attorneys, and business leaders. Dorothy presided over several of the cases, her reputation not only restored, but enhanced by her handling of the crisis. She had faced the ultimate test of judicial integrity and emerged stronger, more committed than ever to the principle that justice must be blind to everything except the law itself. But perhaps the most important transformation was personal. Dorothy and Ruby's relationship evolved from polite acknowledgement to genuine friendship, built on mutual respect and shared experience. Dorothy began to see the courthouse through Ruby's eyes, understanding how invisible people navigated systems designed to exclude them. Ruby, meanwhile, discovered that her voice had power when used at the right moment, in the right way, that being seen and heard was not only possible, but necessary. The final chapter of their story unfolded not in a courtroom, but in Dorothy's chambers. now thoroughly swept for listening devices and monitored by federal security. Ruby had been offered a position with the FBI as a consultant on courthouse security, recognition that her unique perspective was valuable to law enforcement. Dorothy had been appointed to head a federal task force on judicial corruption charged with reforming the system from within. "You saved more than my life," Dorothy told Ruby, as they shared coffee in the chambers where everything had changed. "You saved the idea that justice is still possible, that ordinary people can still make a difference." Ruby smiled, no longer the invisible woman who had cleaned these rooms in silence. "I learned something too," she replied. "Sometimes the most important thing you can do is refuse to stay invisible when it matters most." Their story became a symbol of hope in a time when faith in institutions was at an all-time low. A black judge and a black janitor had stood together against corruption that reached the highest levels of power, proving that integrity could still triumph over influence. Dorothy continued to serve on the federal bench with distinction, while Ruby pursued a law degree with Dorothy's mentorship and support, determined to return to the courthouse one day as an attorney rather than a cleaner. The wine bottle that had nearly ended Dorothy's life was preserved as evidence, but for both women it symbolized something more, the moment when silence became impossible, when invisibility became a choice rather than a condition, when two women, who had never really seen each other, suddenly became allies in the fight for justice. Their friendship transcended the boundaries of race and class and profession, rooted in the simple but profound recognition that doing the right thing sometimes requires extraordinary courage from ordinary people, sometimes the most powerful. Voices come from those the world refuses to hear, and when they finally speak, they can change everything. Ruby Johnson's willingness to step out of the shadows saved not just one life, but an entire system, proving that justice isn't about the marble halls or the prestigious titles. It's about the courage to speak truth to power when everything depends on staying silent. Her story reminds us that we all have the power to choose visibility over safety, voice over silence, and that sometimes the smallest actions can have the most profound consequences. You are amazing. If you genuinely enjoyed this story, please leave a like and subscribe. It's a great feedback for me. If it made you feel seen, heard, or simply reminded you that change is still possible, share it with someone who needs a little hope today. See you.